everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for the book Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. And my mom had been into this series, and she's into the books and the show, and I decided to check it out as well. I'd seen some bits of the show and wanted to see kind of how the books were about. And overall, I enjoyed this. It's interesting. It has time travel elements. It's got historical elements. It's got romance elements as well. And this is a pretty beefy one. This one's like about 850 pages. But this was kind of like a kind of scenario similar to the Dark Tower series with Stephen King, where the first one, at least for me at the moment, was kind of the hardest to get into because of certain kind of pacing issues that kind of get brought up in regards to how chapters are done and how certain kind of break spots are kind of set up, because sometimes you're like, you just make your own kind of stopping point rather than, oh god, this is like a fucking gigantic kind of thing. Doesn't get to the level of Atlas Shrugged, where you got some motherfucker monologuing for like 10 paragraphs, man. But it's that kind of thing going on with how chapters are kind of broken up, and then trying to look up certain things in regards to time periods, like a certain kind of terminology, especially since this starts first off in 1945 and then goes to 1743? Yes, 1743, and eventually kind of like ending at like 1744, beginning of the year. So you've got a lot of different kind of things you got to look up. Word-wise, also in regards to kind of medicinal stuff as well, because the main character of this book is Claire Randall, and she was a nurse during World War II. Her husband of the time, Frank Randall, was also dealing with the whole World War thing going on, and since this is at the aftermath, we begin the book with them pretty much taking kind of vacation. Frank is more in like a historian, going into all these kind of things of like the Jacobite whole kind of movement, trying to reinstall Bonnie Prince Charles to the throne of Scotland, and all those kind of like courtly intrigues and everything. And Claire's like, she's kind of like half listening to this kind of stuff, and that becomes important once the kind of time travel aspect comes into effect, and how that kind of helps her and kind of hinders her, because it's almost like that person who isn't completely into what's going on in the class, but has heard enough to understand what's kind of going on if a test question came up of, hey, who the fuck is this motherfucker? And then you actually meet that motherfucker and you're like, ah, shit, fuck you. And it's not like the great big ones of like, oh god, that's Gandhi, that's Abraham Lincoln, that's Benjamin Franklin, but like enough of the tier kind of ones are like, ah, shit. So the beginning of that's kind of interesting. You get kind of introduced to kind of Claire's character, her relationship with Frank, how they kind of work well with each other, and how they kind of understand their kind of own proclivities. And then we kind of see them kind of exploring this kind of like little town in the Highlands, and then we see them watching these people doing this kind of druid ritual with these stones at Craig the Dune, and she goes up there to kind of like get some herbs and stuff like that, but then she goes through these stones and she kind of gets sucked back into the past. And then that is the interesting kind of aspect, and seeing her kind of drawn in. However, this is where it kind of lags for me because of how the pacing of certain kind of chapters kind of work out. Not that these things aren't interesting, seeing her acclimate to the time, dealing with everything kind of going on, being pretty much English in like the Scottish Highlands and what that kind of entails. Also going more by her maiden name, Beauchamp, and kind of like having to play off her French heritage, because those in the Highlands are like not really that enthused with the English and everything kind of going on with that. That I like the interplay. I love kind of seeing different kind of historical kind of takes. The Temeraire series of like, what if we had the Napoleonic War with fucking Air Force with dragons? The Temeraire series was definitely very interesting for me. So these kind of concepts I'm definitely down to. And it'll be interesting to see how they kind of go more into the time travel aspects of this series, because that's usually where, when you get into certain kind of things, that either bogs down because of like the author doesn't understand how they want to kind of thread out their rules, or they decide that they don't have rules and make it up by the seat of their pants as they go along. I don't think that is the option that goes in here, because I mean, there's like 8 other books after this one, and she's finishing it up with a 10th one. But we see her introduced to Dougal Mackenzie and Jamie, and having to like deal with his ass, and like these people not understanding and very set in their ways of being like, you're a woman, you shouldn't be able to do any of this stuff. It's like, this person's gonna fucking die, so what else do you want me to fucking do, kind of shit. And she takes no shit. Granted, that leads her into some trouble, but I love the feistiness of being like, fuck you, motherfucker, I will do some crazy ass shit. That mainly kind of goes on later on in the story. No, granted, she does still do some kind of crazy stuff, but we see her kind of riding along with these like Scottish outlaws and everything. Jamie first getting like patched up a little bit, her going back and essentially meeting her Frank Randall's like distant relative that she had actually just been introduced to, with like the naming and everything of Blackjack Randall, Jonathan Randall, and him being a complete and utter bastard. And granted, he gets worse throughout this book. He is a completely effective antagonist. Like, the writing for Claire and for Jamie, who are pretty much the anchor characters in here, are very good. Cullum and Dougal Mackenzie, they're very good as well. When we get to Jamie's family at Lollybrock, I like them as well. But the most masterful kind of stuff is with the depravity and the nastiness of Blackjack Randall. Like, it's funny, I love seeing the kind of historical aspect of, like, at first she's like, oh, this is a dusty old ancestor, and then when you get, like, put into the thing, history leaves out a lot of this shit. You could have someone that, like, is barely a footnote, and they're, like, this really great party guy. Or you could see someone barely mentioned and be like, here's this kind of thing, and they're the, like, they'd be the complete biggest bastard of all time, and holy fucking shit. To have him as the kind of antagonistical force that goes on throughout this book, she knows what she's doing with that. So I know this was kind of like almost a kind of like experimental kind of dare to see what she could do, but goddamn, that is what really kind of drew me in to kind of see what kind of goes on. And especially the characters of Claire and Jamie, as we see them kind of like playing off each other at first, seeing her go to Castle Leoch and understand what's going on with Cullum and Dougal, and the relationship that they have with Jamie because of him being an outlaw, and everything being explained with him that Randall fucked him over and was pretty much trying to screw over his sister. And that even brings into the interplay of what goes on with him and his sister as they reunite, because he thinks that his sister had Jonathan's Blackjack Randall's bastard, and she's like, no, you fucking idiot. And seeing them kind of like fight like siblings, I always kind of have a soft spot with that because of like my own sibling relationship, and it's, even though it's not the exact same, that we've never had shouting matches about that kind of stuff, it's interesting to see people play off that stuff and how different kind of sibling relationships are. But it felt very genuine and organic of what's kind of going down, of them miscommunicating and just shouting shit at each other. Let's see. So we did the beginning. Middle portion pretty much takes up like understanding kind of clan politics of what's going on. Jamie threading the needle pretty much because there's this kind of swearing of the oath ceremony to Cullum. We see that Cullum is more the kind of brains behind the operation, as he cannot go out and do most of the things because of his shortened kind of legs and this kind of disease he has. Claire knows what disease he has and kind of the stuff behind it, and understands that he really can't have children. So it's like, what's up with this kid? We find out that it's Dougal's, and that he goes around and does a lot of fucking shit. Now granted, he doesn't fuck around everywhere, but it kind of almost seems that way. And Dougal is pretty much the legs and the cock and the battle kind of portion as he goes out, gets rent from all the cottagers and everything. And at these kind of points, I could definitely understand if somebody's like, this is kind of slow, it kind of takes a little bit to get through. My main kind of hang up was looking up new words and kind of parsing out certain kind of details, but I definitely sped up as we got to Lollybrock and everything going on with that, and me kind of just not glancing over, but understanding what details are important and what details aren't. Like, I don't need to know everything going on with certain kind of things with the plants, and it'll be kind of explained to me. The thing is, when I'm going into details, this at least isn't on the level of Wheel of Time, where it's like they have completely and utterly similar names, or I'm like going into embroidery kind of things on dresses. This does explain stuff on dresses, but strangely enough, not to the kind of level that I had in the Wheel of Time, where I'm like, this is superfluous detail. Like, I'm a details kind of guy, but sometimes there are certain kind of details you don't really need to go into. She doesn't go, Diana does not go into, like, complete genealogical kind of stuff of what goes on with plants and herbal medicines and everything like that. But she does at least give you some, so that way you understand, hey, this is probably going to help, or this is probably going to kill someone. And we see that Claire is utilizing her medicinal knowledge and becoming the kind of healer, but that kind of leads her to kind of problems as people kind of start suspecting her of witchcraft, as she then is also linked up with someone else suspected of witchcraft, Galus. And this starts to become an important kind of bit, because Colum and the rest kind of think of her as an English spy, and Galus becomes kind of important to kind of like help her kind of acclimate as well. But towards the end, things start kind of going nutty. So we'll kind of let's table that for a minute before we get back to it, because we see that she's kind of linked up with Jamie, and then she is kind of forced to marry Jamie to make sure that Randall doesn't go after her and make her, and like kind of take her back with him to figure out what's kind of going on, and to make her like a Scottish citizen. And the thing is, it takes a little bit. We get a lot of kind of love stuff with Jamie and Claire, which I don't mind, but it kind of gets into a little bit of a repetitive kind of bit, where it's like, okay, I kind of get it. We don't have to keep doing this. It doesn't get to the complete wearing out of it. I don't mind lovemaking scenes and all that kind of bit, and understanding how they're kind of getting used to each other, because Jamie was into her, and I was actually a virgin, and she's older than him, and it's interesting to have that kind of power dynamic and understanding as they're kind of like working together, seeing how they kind of do it. And of course, she tries to escape to go back to Craignadoon, but that leads her to be captured by Blackjack Randall, and Jamie and the rest have to risk their lives to save her, and then he, of course, then has to do the power play that, like, she didn't listen to him, so he then has to beat her. Yeah, he beats her. And that's kind of hard to kind of like get through, because he then starts explaining his whole stuff with his father and his view on beatings and everything. And it's not like he goes out like thunder punching her. He does it with like a belt to her ass. It's like, it's still beating her. It's weird. But understanding it and reading through it and getting through, like, these people risk their lives. If we don't do this, if we don't square the accounts, they're not going to trust you. You know what I mean? So you understand it, but you still are like, that's not fucking right. You don't have the understanding of everything that's going on. And seeing them kind of get through this, understand what's going on, her being like, you ever fucking touch me again, I'll fucking kill your ass, kind of shit. And seeing them kind of get past those kind of points, learn each other's kind of history, her eventually opening up to him, and everything kind of going on. Now, granted, that's after everything kind of goes down, and she's pretty much put on trial with Galus as being a witch. And that's because her marrying Jamie instituted this whole thing with this Leary chick at Castle York, who's like, fuck you, I wanted Jamie, and throws her to the wolves, as Galus pretty much had killed her husband, because she's pretty much trying to, like, help the Jacobites in their revolution. And it's like, okay. And she's pregnant with Dougal's child. It's like, oh, shit. and then we find out that she's actually got a smallpox vaccine mark because everything's kind of going down during the witch trial. And then one of the other kind of weird things that I kind of have to bring up is that this book has a weird tendency to try and test the limits of how fast Jamie can teleport to Claire's aid. She's not completely in damsel in distress mode, but this gave me bad flashbacks to Game of Thrones, where people started teleporting at the end of like the final season, where it's almost like we got Claire put in certain situations to almost test the ability of Jamie to get back as fast as possible, because he gets back, he saves her, and Claire's like, Kalis, she's from the future as well. So that institutes another kind of mystery that we'll have to see how that kind of pans out in the rest of the novels and the rest of like the show and whatnot. But that's the big kind of thing, as if she's from another time, what does that entail? How long has she been here? What has she been doing? What are her objectives? All those kind of things. And her pretty much playing off and understanding the superstitions and taking that to an advantage, which Claire could potentially do as well. But we see that her and Jamie then go to Lollybrock and see how he would be as the Laird of Lollybrock, since his father died, and he feels himself responsible because his father, like, pretty much died after seeing what was going on to his son being flogged because of everything going on. And then, because that was the whole thing, he defended his sister, and he was supposed to get flogged by Randall, and he then almost escaped, but he then got hit on other charges, and just, we see all this stuff that Randall's done to him, his back and all that. It's like, ah, shit. So he's still in that outlaw status. That's why he stayed away from Lollybrock. Seeing him reuniting with his family is really kind of cool, and seeing him doing his laird duties as well as helping the people and everything before eventually getting captured and getting sent to, I believe it's Wentworth. Fort William is where Claire was taken for almost trying to get back to Craig Nadoon. And I do like how Jamie's like, oh yeah, I kind of get this. And like understanding the kind of craziness of Claire coming from the future and everything like that, and her trying to like reconcile that, that's more dealt with towards the end of the novel. And see, it really kind of picks up after Lollybrock, and then we see her trying to figure out where Jamie's at, getting more help from Murtaugh, who at this point has pretty much been more of a background character, but getting more into him and understanding him. Almost like a weird, strange little Wolverine kind of dude. Whenever I was like reading about him, I was like, this dude's pretty much just like a Wolverine. It's just in this time period in the Scottish Highlands. But seeing him kind of work with her, getting other people, learning stuff about what Dougal's been doing, and how Galis was to be burned as a witch. She did give birth to the kid before, and Dougal then just left the kid someplace else, and he doesn't want to go after Jamie because it would pretty much be a suicide mission, but Claire's able to get some men to come with her, and going to Wentworth, seeing what's kind of going on. She makes her first escape attempt to free him, but it doesn't work out. She does let some prisoners free, but then she sees that Randall's pretty much playing with him, and Jamie makes an exchange, and Randall throws her out this kind of door, and then she gets pretty much hooked up with this other dude, McGrannock. I think it was McGrannock. If I'm saying that correctly, but like the Lord of Eldridge. And they essentially institute a prison break by somehow herding fucking cattle in there, thinking that they've killed Blackjack and freeing Jamie. However, he is entirely not. He's fucked up, man. Like, Randall destroys pretty much, like, severely injures his right hand, which sucks. However, he's left-handed, so that's the thing. But he has tortured him, he's raped him, and seeing the effects that that has on Jamie, as it's horrendous. It's very gripping in how it's described. So this is not something that you just kind of do and read. So be very careful with this. And they also had a test where like Jamie pretty much took Claire back to Craig de Dune, and she's like, no, I'm going to stay here with you and live out like this. It's like, interesting, because he wanted to test all this stuff that she was saying, and once he's pretty much confirmed, he's like, fuck, that was some weird ass shit. Alright. But we see them trying to keep each other together, her trying to heal him and all that, them getting to France and him being completely and utterly seasick, but seeing him pretty much kind of wanting to just die. And her idea is to essentially take all of the information that she's known of Jonathan Randall, Blackjack Randall, and Frank, and essentially get Jamie to shadowbox Blackjack, which is insane. Like, it's not a plot demands kind of thing. She's put into a position that he's pretty much letting himself die, and he's just gone through too much. And then we see that like working in this abbey and everybody trying to help out. Now, granted, everybody's not helping out at this point. She just has this batshit insane idea to try and do this, because what if it doesn't get him up to the point to do it? What if he kills her? It's insane, and it's really crazy to see it kind of go through as she is able to kind of get him to kind of get his will to fight, to be alive back, and seeing them kind of work together and heal together, and then seeing her also talking to one of the monks there, Anselm, and asking about, like, okay, she killed this dude in the prison escape. She's a time traveler. What should she do? Should she not affect things? He's like, no, everybody affects things. I mean, her being here affects things, and technically, her being married to Jamie would precede her marriage to Frank, so there's no problems there, and that he's like really receptive, and it's really kind of cool to see them kind of bounce ideas off and talk about these kind of, this is a big kind of science concept, and it's like, cool. I do like their interplay. It's very much just at the end, but it's a cool kind of thing to understand where Claire's at this point, and where this character Anselm's at this point, and just seeing them kind of bounce off of each other before we see that Jamie takes her down to this like hot spring where they like have hot steamy sex, and her saying that she's pretty much pregnant. It's like, and that's important because her and Frank haven't been able to conceive children in 1945, and they've been making it like jackrabbits during this point, and she's pretty much thought of herself as being barren. We also do get another kind of birth scene with regards to Jenny and her husband Ian as at Lollybrock, Jenny being Jamie's sister, and seeing how that kind of works in that time period is like, holy shit. Huh. But it's like, oh damn, that's definitely a place to end it. And granted, I've already started the second book, and I'm already kind of like, what the fuck? It's interesting to start at the various different kind of presents, but I'm just like, what the hell? Because we end this one, they're pretty much back together, they're working through their shit, and she's like, I'm pregnant, and they're in France, and they're trying to decide what to do to, he does, Jamie's uncle, one of his uncles, now granted, there's a lot of uncles, they do go into a lot of genealogy, and Claire even's like, shut the fuck up on certain kind of stuff, because they start going into, like, deep kind of shit, almost kind of like what Frank would do. She's like, no, give me the pertinence. I'm like, yep, I don't need to know the left toe of your third great grand uncle's dog. Just tell me about your uncle, man. But, like, his uncle is, like, the head abbot of this abbey, and gives them introductions to pretty much the rest of the kind of, like, Fraser kind of courtly stuff in France. And they're like, we either go to France, we go to Italy. I mean, France would be the better kind of place, because evidently they're both fluent enough in it to make their way there. So, we'll see how that kind of works out. I enjoyed this. Even though I had certain issues with, like, getting through the middle of it and the pacing, the characters are good, I like the concept, I like the story, and I like the execution of what's kind of going on here. It's not something I would recommend to everyone, because of, you really need to be in the history, and the antagonist is a fucking horrendous person, and there's a lot of horrendous shit that goes on in here, and if that's like triggering for you, don't go for this. Just seriously, I still like it, and I still like the story and seeing what's going on, but man, you have to be comfortable with dealing with that kind of stuff, because it was hard seeing Jamie kind of going through that, and then also Claire of how do you help someone with this? This isn't just something that you can easily fix. I mean, granted, even with the physical aspects of it, she couldn't completely fix his hand. It'll get better, but Blackjack fucking mutilated it. It's like there's some stuff that it's like you gotta thread carefully, and there's some nutty shit in here, but I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. And I'm gonna go through the books first, and then eventually go through the TV show as well to see how they kind of compare, how they kind of contrast, how characters and events are kind of played out kind of differently, and kind of doing some comparison and contrast on that kind of route as well. But if this sounds like something for you, definitely give it a check out and maybe a try. If you get kind of bogged down in certain kind of places, depending upon what it is, maybe kind of go and try and pick at through certain kind of parts. I normally don't really recommend that, because you're going to lose some shit, especially like probably courtly intrigue of what's kind of going on and what is kind of happening with Dougal and Colum, and how they're both kind of dealing with like the Jacobites and who's doing what, and how they're kind of working out through that, because this is leading to the Battle of Culloden, which is the end of Bonnie Prince Charles's attempt at taking the throne. So we'll see how this kind of works out. I like her writing style. That's the biggest kind of thing that I can have, and I can see if an author if I can at least get into their writing style and understand how they kind of progress on certain kind of things, I can usually work it out with it. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. Now, there are certain kind of instances where if it gets into like grim, dark, and just depressive and crazy, stupid bullshit with certain kind of things, it just takes me out of it. This at least balances that kind of stuff, because there's like one thing, there's like Prince of Thorns or whatnot, it just didn't jive with me. I'm like, this just seems very edgy, and just for the sake of being like, kind of shit. So even like the author's writing styles, more like, I understand the style, not for me. But yeah, it's really weird. If you're into the history stuff and are alright with time travel and the kind of gruesomeness that can pop up in here, I think you'll have a pretty good time with this. Otherwise, you'd probably want to look at other kind of things. So, those are my opinions on the book. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.